high-performing people. We're so glad you took the time to join us. Some quick notes about GoToWebinar. You can raise your hand to ask questions. You can ask questions with the chat. We'll do a Q&A session about halfway through this meeting and hopefully answer any questions you have. All of you who subscribe to the Navigator should know Greg Smith. Greg is the CEO and president of Chart Your Course International, an expert in his field. He is a business consultant, a keynote speaker, a certified DIS assessment and trainer, and the author of hundreds of articles and 9 books. Greg?
Hey, thank you, Sarah. Welcome everybody to today's web seminar. Hopefully everybody is having some good weather. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's gorgeous. And I want to welcome many of you. I see a lot of my DIS certified members are on the call today. This should be a good review for you, as well as hopefully bring some new information. We're going to be on today's call about, I guess, 45 or so minutes, and as Sarah said, we'll take questions and answers, and this is sort of this GoToWebinar, so everybody's sort of on mute, and you can see your little box to the right of your screen, and if you have a question, you can there's a little hand, you can raise your hand to ask a question like you're in class, or you can do something on the chat box, and Sarah will be there to try to answer your questions, or at least get you ready to answer or ask a question live at that particular moment. You know, and I've said this a lot of times is, if I knew back in my 20s what I know today, I would have been a much better leader, a much better person in understanding human behavior. And I used to think, see, I left college, I went to a little school in Dahlonega, Georgia, and I went in the military as a lieutenant. And I used to think if people were not like me, they were defective. And that's a strange management concept, isn't it? Is because I'm very task-oriented, I'm to the point, I get motivated because I achieve things, and I didn't understand anything about behavioral style or personalities, and I probably ruined a lot of careers because I found out, 80% of the population is different than my behavioral style. And if I knew about using assessments or DISC or the other reports we use, I would have been much more effective. So here's what we're going to accomplish today is why use assessments. And I know we got a lot of information to cover in 45 minutes. And talk a little bit about the different types of assessments, and then we're going to talk about how to use, assessments to, how do you use it for hiring, and how do you use assessments to build more stronger, effective teams, and how do you use assessments to reduce conflict and improve communication. And I'm going to do this by sort of doing like 3 or 4 case studies on how we use these assessments in different scenarios. And then I want to let you know about our upcoming DISC training programs. We have one coming up next month. And when putting together, and a lot of you have been beating me on the head to do this for many, many years, put together a Consultants Entrepreneurs Academy on how do you build your business. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that at the end. So here we go, and buckle up. Let me ask you, how many of you have ever hired or promoted or made a bad hiring decision? And just can recall the havoc it may have brought to your organization. Or maybe it was a partner, or I had a lot of people tell me, I wish I had my spouse take these reports or these assessments before I got married. And you really have to realize is I look at people differently now, after been doing this for about 19 years, is when I see a person, I observe their behavior. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what kind of person, what kind of behavioral style is this? And we have to realize in today's working world, in our work environment, we cannot afford to promote or hire the wrong person because it just creates all sorts of chaos, as well as a huge financial burden to an organization if you put the wrong person in the right job. Now, maybe have you ever heard of this saying? Most people are hired for their experience but fired for their attitudes, or fired for their behaviors. And this is important to understand, and this is what the assessments, whether you use Myers-Briggs or DISC or another version of behavior report, helps you understand what makes this person tick. How do they interact with other people? So here's make sure you can see my screen. That's terrible, isn't it? So hopefully you can see my screen now. Sarah, let me know. Make sure you can see my screen. That
I can see it.
Okay, good. So here's a couple interesting about job interviews. A buddy of mine, Ira Wolf, did a study. He said 40% of turnover can be eliminated if you use the proper effective hiring and interviewing techniques. And then, Sarah, who works with us at Charter Course International, did some research and pulled up these figures that it costs an organization anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 to hire someone. We talk about all the time, the interviewing time, the training time, and that's just for a low-paid, probably hourly individual. But when you're looking at an executive-level person who's making, $100,000 or $100,000 plus, we're talking anywhere about $20,000, $30,000 in finding that person. And that doesn't even include, if you use a recruiter, that percentage you have to pay the recruiter when you find someone. So let's sort of start with a bird's eye view, and then we're going to dive into these particular case studies when we start looking and talking about how these assessments can be used. And there's really five areas where you can use assessments. First, you can use it for selection. Now, a lot of people use just a DISC assessment for hiring and selection. But you have to make sure when you use it for hiring a DISC report, they have some kind of job matching or benchmarking process, so you know what is the behavioral style that's going to lead to that person being successful in a particular job. And the second thing is placing people in the right positions. If you hire someone like me, who, and we look at my DISC style as a high D, higher C, there are certain jobs I'm great at. But if you put me in other jobs, particularly involves a lot of details or finances or budgeting, I would fail in it. And you have to understand, when you look at a person, I sort of see an individual like, a hot rod, an automobile. I remember the GTOs back in my teenager days, and the RPM, revolutions per minute, or the engine underneath that hood. And when you have that person in the right job, the right behavioral style, with the right competencies, then that car is going to move very fast, and that person is going to be very effective. The other way you can use assessments, if you're an independent consultant, is for development and coaching. I would never try to coach anyone unless I first understood their competencies, their motivators, and their behavioral styles. Because contrary to, I guess, popular opinion, not every person can just be anything they want to be. We're all have specific skills and uniqueness that we bring to the job, and we need to understand what job makes that help us fulfill our potential. And you find the majority of our customers, our clients, use our DISC reports just strictly for reducing conflict and helping team members communicate better with each other. And then there are assessments that show you if a person's really engaged, that their clutch is fully engaged, and that they're turning at optimal speed. So those are the 5 ways you can use assessments. So let's talk about the next important part, the missing piece. And this is what I like, is it takes a person normally, before you can really understand that person's personality, their behavior, without an assessment, it could take you up to 60 to 90 days working one-on-one with that person before you really understand what makes them tick. An assessment can do it in 15 minutes. And it's really, assessment, because you cannot trust interviewing anymore. There's only certain questions you can ask. Most people today, in particular if they're coming out of another job or out of school, already know what questions you're going to ask them. They probably have already looked it up on, and made up and rehearsed answers. That is, if there's someone who has a little savvy. And so an assessment, though, at least our reports cannot be fooled. And they really tell you what makes that person tick. So when we're using them for just hiring, there is sort of a process you need to follow. When you're trying to use them for hiring purposes, there's sort of like 4 pieces of the puzzle. And the interview is critical. And there are many organizations improve their interviewing processes or have multiple interviewing opportunities, or they'll have a team interviewing people. Those are all good if you actually have the right questions and you really know what are the competencies and what that job requires from the individual. And then there's you still got to do background and references. However, doing reference checks is everybody will provide you a list of names of people they only want you to talk to. So I'm not sure how reliable that part is. And you have to understand your company culture. If you're in a law firm, you're going to probably have a more formal culture. If you're working at Zappos, you're going to have a more informal culture, because you have to understand if that person really will fit in. And then a critical piece is the assessment piece. And many people use the reports for the finalists who come, comes down to 1 or 2 people, then they'll have them take the assessment to really ensure that this is the right person for that right job. So I want to just go back, and I use this in my training program a lot, talking about Jim Collins' book, is how do you know if this person is the right person for the job? And I'm not here, don't want to spend a lot of time just talking about interviewing techniques, but that's very important, is you need to know, if you're filling a job, what is the characteristics or the competencies and the skills and the knowledge that this person needs to have to be successful. In Jim Collins' book, From Good to Great, he tells you, you need to have like level 5 leader. But he doesn't really show you how do you know what that looks like. And that's what I like about these assessments that we use, is it will show you what this person brings to the table. So let's talk about one report that many of you are familiar with, the manager staff or Insights to Success report. Many of you also will notice that last week we had a totally new look of the report, and hopefully it's a whole lot more, at least it is to me, more aesthetically pleasing, and it's added a little more information that wasn't there in the older version. But this report is, I would say, more of a DISC report on steroids. And there are a lot of companies that provide variations of DISC reports. And it's like, though, you got to be careful, because if you're not careful, you could be using a report that is not valid and reliable. And what our reports provide is a possible, 384 different behavioral patterns. And it's very, it's a accurate report that measures in much more detail than many of the other products that may be out there on the market. And we use 2 particular graphs, and everybody's pretty familiar with the standard sort of DISC report. And then we added many years ago this wheel report, which is a great tool for job matching and benchmarking a team, of how people are plotted on this wheel behaviorally, and who's going to be the director learners and who are going to be the implementers. And you probably might want to download one of the sample reports off my website to get a little bit more detail on what that report looks like. But it's a powerful report that gives you 22 pages of information, and it only takes you 10 or 15 minutes to answer the questions on the website. Let me just review the 4 basic behavioral styles. And for you who've been through our training courses, this may be maybe a little bit boring, but let me go review those just in case. There are 4 dominant behavioral styles, and the D's are we always use the color red. And high D, like Mr. Cowell here, Simon Cowell from the television program, it is a person who is focused on solving problems and challenges. And everybody's either going to be a higher D or a lower D. The higher you are, the more direct you are. The lower you are, the more indirect. And you'd rather not initiate problems. You'd rather maybe follow someone else if you're a low D. And then we have the color yellow for I, influence, is how a person interacts with people and contacts. And, if you were, for example, a high I, you would be like Oprah Winfrey. If you were a low I, you would be more pessimistic. You'd rather avoid people, or you sort of maybe grumble and grouch a lot because, that's your natural behavioral style. And then the green color is for the steadiness. People, we find 39% of the population, these are the high S's are the ones who are more process-oriented, like Norm from Cheers. It always sits in the same place, always does the same thing, is consistent, is reliable, is loyal. So, Lord knows we need lots of those people in an organization because they sort of integrate everything that everybody else is doing on the particular team. And then we have the C for compliance. Like my favorite television show, Downton Abbey, and the name, was the head butler, and now his name slips my mind. But it's all about process. The higher the C score, the more numbers oriented, the more black and white oriented. Following tradition, doing things a certain way, versus a low C is someone who's going to be stretching or breaking the rules and being more innovative versus the higher C people. So this is just a general overview of a DISC assessment. Those aren't the only assessments we provide and use. But I want to talk a little bit about, if you go to the next step and talk about using our reports for benchmarking or job matching, there is a process you want to follow. And because you need to know, who, what is the behavioral characteristics and the competencies a person brings if used for hiring. What are they good at? What are their limitations? So I want to just sort of, review, and there's probably a lot more detail here than we have time to talk about. But when you use these reports for hiring, you need to sort of talk about the benchmarking process. And one way you can use these reports is through profiling or analyzing your top and bottom performers, because there are certain behavioral styles that can be more suited or better suited for certain jobs, and vice versa. So what you can do with the report is understand that where people fall on this wheel we were talking about. And hopefully I haven't lost everybody at this particular moment. But on the last page of the report, there's a wheel like this. And everybody will fall either on the outward side or toward the center of this particular wheel. And if you haven't taken a report, this maybe not make much sense to you at this point. But what we do is benchmark. What are the behavioral characteristics that we need for a person to possess if they're going to be successful depending where you fall on this wheel, you see the characteristics that describe the individual on the outside of this wheel. For example, if we're needing a person who's going to be successful at sales, just based on the thousands and thousands of people I've assessed over the years, we have found that the best salespeople will fall somewhere around this quadrant of the wheel. Promoters, they're very good communicators. Sometimes, depending how strong that characteristic, they may tend to talk more than they need to, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the job. But in general, successful salespeople will fall here. And so this is what the job requires. But in this case, this individual, their natural style was way over here in the blue color or the more analytical side. This tends to be people who tend to be more technically oriented, who are not comfortable communicating a lot or in public domains. And they're more concerned about quality and accuracy. So if we hired someone like that who is required to be more of an extrovert, more of a high I with some D and some S, there's going to be a mismatch. This is not going to be the right person for that particular job. And they may do fine the first couple of months, but after time, their energy level, and they will drop and they become more disengaged. Now, if you know this information up front, it will save you a lot of time and money by putting someone in a position he or she may not be comfortable with or good at. And if you're in a sales job, you cannot afford to have someone who's afraid to pick up the telephone or go meet their customers because they are more concerned about accuracy and detail than for people and relationships. So hopefully that's making some sense to you. Now, I don't know if there's any questions. If there are, let me know, Sarah. Otherwise, I'm going to jump into the first this first case study and go a little bit more detail of how one particular organization uses these reports.
There was one. Are there other forms of disassessment, and how is the disassessment different from others?
Yeah, good question. And like I said, there are a lot of companies who provide different types of DISC assessments. And some only measure 16, they may have only 16 behavior patterns. And a lot of people who have used DISC in the past maybe are used to the old-fashioned scratch-off DISC report that just tells you if you're a high D or a high I or a high S or a high C. And we just don't put as much faith and confidence in those traditional reports than we do our reports that can generate over 384 different behavior patterns. So I guess it's sort of like you just have to make sure that the reports that you use are validated and they're reliable, and that the information provided doesn't discriminate against any particular group or population of people. And at least we know with our reports they don't. Let me talk about this one case study of how a bank determined who are the best bank tellers for their organization. Now, this bank was having, prior to using reports, a lot of turnover with their employees. And when they started using the reports, they had everybody who were currently in the organization who were past, present, and potential bank tellers take the report, and then there's a system on your online. We have an online internet delivery system that allows you to administer these reports and collect the data on each individual to generate a wheel or a job matching profile like this. And what they found out is that the best tellers fell within this circle that I drew here on this slide here. And what is a good teller? I mean, it's like if you put if you hired someone who's more like the previous slide as a salesperson, they would make a terrible bank teller, because what we find is that the natural behavioral style of this group of people is they were consistent, they were loyal, they liked repetitious work, dealing with customers as they walk in or they go through the drive-through is, pretty repetitious. And the people that fell within the circle had the lowest turnover. They were happy with their job. It didn't require a lot of time and energy to manage these people. That, even though they were unique and different, their behavioral styles were pretty similar as they are represented here. So what the bank started doing is, when they were hiring or interviewing for bank tellers, if their report did not end them in this area, they didn't get the job as bank teller. They may have made a wonderful manager or an HR person or an accountant, but this was able to reduce their turnover significantly, because now they weren't constantly hiring people because they were here today and gone tomorrow. Is that these people lasted the longest, and they've been using these reports for over 10 years now. So here's an example of how one organization used one of our reports for hiring. Now, let me go a little bit back to talk about a salesperson again, because there are different types of assessments, and each level of assessment gives you more information, more predictability about that person. It's like if you just use a DISC assessment on one individual, you're getting 59% more information or more predictable information about that person beyond the interview that guarantees you a better chance that you're hiring the right person. But for certain individuals and certain jobs, we might want to go to the second level and the third level, and there are actually a combination of reports that you might want to use in a person. Now, I love salespeople because, I love people that are good salespeople, because for some organizations, they're the reason the organization is successful or not successful. And this one person was, just last week, it was a medical company that uses our report, medical sales. And so they had one of the applicants take this report. And we already talked a little bit about the behavior manager staff report. And you see this person falls very near the sweet spot for salespeople. And so we have them take the second report, and in some cases there's a third report. This is what we call the Workplace Motivators Report. Each person, each individual has, there's 6 motivators in life that makes them either passionate or interested in a particular career field or aspect of their life, or uninterested. So if you have a person who's, number one, their behavioral style or their DISC report is looking good, you want to make sure, particularly for salespeople, is that their motivators are aligned and are showing the high scores that they need to show versus, and as well as the low scores. Now, when I saw this report, I called up the HR director and said, you better hire this person before they walk out the door, because this person is a keeper. Now, a lot of you never seen this report, may not know what you're seeing here visually. But we find with salespeople, their number one motivator needs to be utilitarian. We just find people who are high utilitarians have a unique DNA where they have to sell, 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 sell. And this is one of the highest scores I've ever seen on an applicant. So that's why I said you better hire her, and it was a her, before she walked out the door and someone else snatched her up. Because finding the right person is hard to do today. There may be a lot of people out there looking for jobs, but finding the right person with the right skills, and in this case, the right DNA, is hard to find, hard to do. And so, utilitarian is return on investment and money. They like to make money, or they're very conservative. They hold money close to their chest. This person, their fourth is individualistic, which is power and authority. So this person isn't going to be concerned about getting pay, promotion. They are going to be concerned about pay raises or bonuses, but they're not concerned about power. Now, I could just go in an hour just talking about one of these reports, but we're sort of doing a broad brush today, and we're getting toward that 3:45 time. So here's why I was excited about this one person, is that we have done research on individuals who have super high utilitarian scores, and we have been able to show that these people can make, and this is several years old, so it's probably much higher, somewhere between $500,000 in sales to $500,000 to $1 million in sales in this one particular industry that we looked at. So those people are hard to find, and if you're looking for salespeople, you want to have them in your company. Now, there's a third report that we run, because when I work with clients, there's like 3 different levels, and some clients just say, Greg, I'm interviewing John Doe. How about running him through your battery of assessments and tell me what you think based on your experience looking at thousands of other people if this person's a good fit for the job. And we call that more of a personalized selection process. So we will do a third report where we look at particular competencies or characteristics that are critical, and we use a different type of assessment for that measures 32 different competencies. And for a particular job, some of these competencies are more important than others. It's always amazing to me when companies do job interviewing, they have no idea what competencies this person needs to possess. They just ask them the same old interview questions. Oh, how do you handle a disruptive team member? What would you do about that, Greg? I mean, this is the kind of stuff you need to be looking at. What's beneath the tip of the iceberg is what the interview process is, but you got to look below the surface to find out, does this person, and these are super important that these people score high in, like self-management. Do they have initiative? Do they start things, or they just sit around waiting for people to tell them what to do? And I don't care if they have a degree from Harvard Business School, which means nothing about their potential success in a particular job if they don't have motivation or self-management or personal accountability. How many CEOs have gotten themselves in trouble with integrity issues? And all this could be looked at in the beginning before you pay all those attorneys and lawsuits and get HR all upset with you. So anyway, you can generate reports that tells you, when it comes to personal accountability, this is how the applicant or the individual, this is what the job requires. This is how the individual scored, and you can see what the gap is and determine, if you're looking at 2 individuals, which of the 2 score the highest in these particular areas, which should tell you this is the best person for the job. How do you determine between, applicant A and applicant B without just going with your gut feelings and being influenced by biases? So anyway, let me talk about another real-life situation of a group. Well, I'm going to skip over for the sake of time. I'm going to skip this one and come down to an organization we work with, a manufacturing company. And the issues listed, below here were some of the problems this organization was experiencing. And if you're an independent consultant and you go in and you do some sort of culture survey or a focus group, you start to determine what's the problem with the organization. And in this particular case, this organization, the president, who was a very highly educated person, was having a major conflict with the plant manager in this manufacturing company. And I'll explain this behaviorally. Hopefully I'll do a decent job to show you what we saw here is, and I covered this in our DISC certification training program as well, is the red circle represented the plant manager. And just, the behavioral style of someone who falls on this outward wheel, outward ring, just means this person is the proverbial bull in the china shop, does not like to listen to advice, shoots from the hip, loves and enjoys creating conflict. And this was the president, who was the outside ring of the wheel, just is a person someone who's more introverted, doesn't like to be confrontational, doesn't like conflict, doesn't like to verbally communicate comfortably with people. And so what you had is it's like open warfare between the plant manager and the president. And the poor president, the plant manager, enjoyed creating conflict in public, in staff meetings, and taking authority away from individuals. And you can just imagine what the chaos was like in this company. And so what we need to do is we had this situation, and how do you handle this without making everybody angry and start fighting with each other, is what we had both of them, including all the managers, take an assessment. You're trying to make people aware of their behavioral style. It was sort of like me in my younger days, is I was probably had a behavioral style that was somewhere near that plant manager. And you realize if you're that direct, you cause people problems. You may be good with solving problems, but sometimes you're solving problems by walking over the backs of people instead of involving them collegially or as a team. And this wasn't happening with this organization. They were all sort of like, run, dodge, and duck when the plant manager came around. And so when all the managers took the report and we sat down in a workshop, went over the critical information showing here's what works, here's what doesn't work, then the lights started going off. And they said, well, no wonder the morale is bad and the communication's bad in the company, because we're all sort of analytical managers and we don't like to be direct, and we have analysis paralysis and we take too long to make a decision. That doesn't work in every situation. So then they said, oh, we need to start being friendlier and communicating better, and that will improve the morale of the employees who are, playing dodgeball between the president and the plant manager. And then the plant manager, we realized, because his behavior style was so sharp and so direct, that he required additional help. So he went off and he was received, in-depth, executive level coaching, and learning that his management style had to change and he had to adapt, and he couldn't be so direct. And the president of the company, since he was the president of the company, he didn't want to change, and he's, that's just the way he operates, still going to this day. But the other managers, when they said, well, we're going to be more, over here for the employees, and then communication started improving. And then they went through a workshop where we got people to, break down the superficial barriers that they had, understand how to communicate